the topic that I'm going to address is about trying to see associational work through new eyes. And the reason that I wanted to talk about that is because that's exactly what we're trying to do here in Nashville, sort of by necessity, but also sort of just because of the stage of life our organization is in. So let me tell you just a little bit about where we are, and then hopefully I can share some principles, the way that we're looking at things that might be helpful to you as you think about associational work. So a little bit about me. So I have actually been on the team here at the Nashville Baptist Association for less than a year. So it's a good opportunity to try and view associational work through new eyes. Now, prior to taking this role, I had very little, I would say minimal understanding of what associational work looked like. And so I came to the role, I hope, with not a lot of preconceived notions about the way that things ought to work or ought not to work, which again, I think was an advantage in trying to reset some things here in our city, in our area. Our previous executive director, served the Nashville Baptist Association for approximately 30 years. And he did that in a variety of different roles. And he had the foresight 5 years ago to start planning for his retirement, and just to recognize, which was a very courageous thing on his part, just to recognize that we can't continue to do everything the way that we once did. But he also recognized that at the age and stage of life where he was in, he didn't feel like that he was the right person to be able to charge into the future. He felt like he was the right person to be able to help transition, but that the need would be for somebody new to come in. Our association, probably like many of yours, is over 120 years old. And so the mandate that I got from our board of directors, we have a board of directors that governs us, was one of freshness and relevance. But they also gave me a great deal of freedom in terms of specifically what that would look like. So how have we tried to look at associational work through new eyes over the course of the last year? Well, the way that we began was with a commitment that we are going to be honest with each other and with our churches about our true state. So we wanted to, as much as possible, begin with clarity about where we truly were, and then clarity about where we truly wanted to go. And clarity begins with embracing the reality of where you are, even if that is a painful reality. Napoleon, great French general, once said that leaders define reality and then give hope. Too often we try and reverse those things, that we're really, really quick to talk about future plans and vision, things that we think that can happen in the future. And when we do that in the absence of defining the actual reality of where we are, many times we find that there's not a motivation for people to actually get there. Perhaps you've seen this firsthand in churches in your association, that from the outside looking in, you can look and you can see, man, this church, unless something dramatic changes in 5, 6, maybe 10 years, this church is no longer going to exist. And yet, when you talk with the people inside of those congregations, they have yet to come to the point where they truly embrace the reality of where they are. They still think that there's one magic bullet out there, that if this just happened, or if this just changed, or whatever that magic thing is, that it will just all of a sudden bring them out of where they are and propel them into the future. That's not a recognition of reality. You got to recognize the reality of where you are before you start to give hope. So how did we try to do that? Well, we did it in 3 ways. We talked about reality in terms of our reputation, in terms of our financial status, and in terms of the overall culture. In terms of our reputation, one of the things that I did, probably like many of you when you came into your role, was that I spent a good deal of time just out of the office. We all know that associational work, the tracks on which all of this runs, really is relationships. And so I tried to work really, really hard to build relationships very, very quickly. And I knew of no better way to do that than just to try and be in every single church in our association that I could. But I also wanted to try and be as intentional as possible about those meetings, knowing that pastors are busy and not knowing when the next time it would be that I would have a chance to talk with them. And so even though our conversations in those early meetings took a lot of different terms, one of the things that I always tried to ask was in a very honest way and assuring them that they would not hurt my feelings. I really tried to ask two questions depending on their current level of investment in the association. If they were deeply invested in the association, I wanted to ask them, why are you involved in the NBA? What tangible benefit, what are you getting from this association that is valuable to you to make you choose to continue to be involved? Or if the church was a sort of on the outskirts, on the periphery, not deeply involved with the work we were trying to do, to ask them, why have you ceased to be involved at a deep level with the NBA? And then documenting and recording all of those answers and trying to see thematically, are there some general themes and answers to those questions that come up? And then when you bring all those things together, you really start to get a firm assessment of your reputation. Not who do you think you are, but who do other people, who do the people that you're trying to serve, who do those people actually in reality, who do they think you are as an organization? So the second area of clarity that I wanted to try and make clear to us on the team here is in terms of our finances. Now, probably like many of you, when you take a broad look financially at how our association runs, there are basically two main streams of revenue. There are the church contributions. So these are the voluntary, out of the budget money that churches in our area send for associational work whenever they do that. Some do it monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever it is. So that's one revenue stream, church contributions. The other revenue stream is everything else. And everything else for you might be, you might have some investments that pay a little bit of interest. You might have some private donors that donate money to the NBA. It could be rental fees that you have on various properties, whatever it is. For our purposes, it was really helpful for me to divide those into as simple as possible into those two broad categories, church contributions and everything else. And then again, in the pursuit of clarity, to do a year-over-year analysis for the last 5 years to see what has happened to those. Now, here's a story that's probably familiar to you all as well. What I found was that over the last 5 years, the amount of our budget that was funded by church congregations, by church contributions was going like this. It's on a downward trajectory, therefore requiring that the amount that was funded of our budget by other contributions had by necessity to keep going like this. So in other words, the percentage of our work that was funded by direct church contributions was going down, and the percentage of our work that was funded by everything else was going up over the last 5 years. Now that is, to me anyway, was a troubling thing. And the reason why it was troubling is because we, again, in clarity, began to think of church contributions as a true measure of two things, trust and value. Guys, it was a watershed moment for us to be able to say with conviction, the reason why we are going to track month over month and year over year church contributions is because not just because we want to keep the lights on in this association, it's because for us, church contributions are a measure of trust and value. Now, that's not to say that if a church decreases the amount they're giving to the association, that they no longer trust us and that they no longer value us. It's not to say that. But it is to say that if a church is decreasing its contributions to the association, that they no longer trust and value us in relation to all the other things that they might trust and value. So you think about that as a scenario. If a church is giving X amount of dollars in year one and then decreases the amount that they're giving in year two, they had to make a conscious choice to decrease that amount. And you might say, well, that could be because the church is shrinking. That could be true. But even in that case, they are trusting and valuing their own security as a congregation more than they are trusting and valuing the collective work of the association. You see what I mean? It's the ability to say with clarity, this is the reason why these things matter, and to be able to say it with conviction, not just because we want to be a financially stable organization. So that was our true financial state, that we had a money issue, but the money issue was revelatory of the fact that we had a deeper issue, which was a trust and value issue, as opposed to all the other things that a church could trust and value. So clarity on reputation, clarity on finances, and then finally, clarity on culture. So culture, when I say that, I meant let's try and get clarity on how we see each other as an internal team, people who actually work for the organization. And this actually was the slowest, ironically, it was the slowest thing to become clear. And the reason why is because any kind of culture is built on all kinds of, past experiences, preconceived notions, stuff that happened 30 years ago that you're not aware of. And so the only way that you really become clear about culture is over the course of time and taking the opportunity to ask questions. Why did you respond like that when I said this? Why do you seem resistant to doing this particular thing that I feel like we need to do? By taking the time and the intentionality to try and ask those questions and to do it in an objective and dispassionate kind of way really helps you come to a sense of clarity about what is happening in your own culture as an organization. So reputation, financial, culture. And while we're still getting increased amount of clarity on those, I certainly feel like at this point, we have enough clarity to actually begin planning the future. So we focused on clarity. The next thing that we tried to do, still trying to do, is to focus on discipline. So clarity was the first big rock. You got to be clear before you can give hope. Discipline is the second big rock, because without discipline, you can't really go anywhere as an organization of any kind. Now, when I say discipline, what I mean by discipline is having the discipline to say yes to the right opportunities and say no to the wrong opportunities. That's what I mean by discipline. One of the things that we found as we were walking through trying to get clarity on our organization is that over the course of 120 years, as will happen with any organization, over the course of time, you just start to be involved in more and more and more things, and you spread your attention and your focus more and more and more broadly. None of the things that you're involved in are bad things. The question is not whether those things are good or bad. The question is whether those things are right or wrong, given your organization. But in order to answer that question, in order to answer the question of whether something is right or wrong, you have to be laser focused and know for sure, what is our organization actually supposed to do? So I want to recommend and commend a tool to you that really helped us come around that. It's a book that you all probably have read because it's very popular, but it's been immensely helpful for me in this. And it's a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And in Good to Great, it's a research-based book. Collins and his research group analyzed all sorts of different organizations from across the landscape. They do a variety of different things. You've got technology organizations, manufacturing organizations, nonprofit organizations. And all of these organizations were existing at a good level. That is, they were solvent, even profitable. They were rocking right along. But his question was, what makes an organization go from a good level to a great level? And they had their own definition of what greatness is. It was mainly financial in nature. But the thing that was really interesting to me is that they qualified going from good to great, that in order to be considered a great organization, they had to maintain that level of greatness for over 15 years, which is pretty impressive. So then the book details several principles that all of those organizations had in common in order to maintain that level of greatness. One of those principles was very, very valuable to me, and I think it would be helpful for you in terms of trying to zero in on the answer to the question, what are we going to do? Because once you know what you're going to do, then it gives you real legs to stand on to be able to say no to not bad opportunities, but wrong opportunities. Collins, one of the principles that he describes is what he calls the hedgehog concept. And he calls it the hedgehog concept. It's based on a Greek parable of a fox and a hedgehog. And in brief, the way the parable goes is that, all the hedgehog ever does is go from home to food to home to food to home. That's all the hedgehog does. Well, one day the fox sees the hedgehog on the road and thinks to himself, well, this would be a great meal. I'm going to have a hedgehog for lunch. So he charges down to try and attack the hedgehog. The hedgehog rolls up in a ball, and the fox is foiled no matter how many different directions he tries to attack. The next day, the fox tries to come at the hedgehog from a different direction, and so it goes day after day, the fox continually attacking the hedgehog from all different kinds of ways, and every time the hedgehog rolls up in a ball and protects himself. The principle here for Collins is that the fox is scattered everywhere all the time. The hedgehog is concerned only with searching for lunch and taking care of his home. That's it. Every great organization, according to Collins, knows what their hedgehog concept is, because hedgehogs are not stupid, they are simple. And the essence of profound insight is simplicity. The hedgehog concept then is a simple, crystalline concept that flows from a deep understanding about the intersection of three circles. So here's the exercise for you to do either by yourself or with your team. It's to answer these three key questions, and the place where those three answers to these questions intersects, the place in the middle, that is your hedgehog concept. So what are the three questions? They're these. Question one, what can you be the best in the world at? And this is a realistic question. It's not what can you be good at or what can you sustain. It's realistic, looking at your organization. What can you be the best in the world at? Question number two, what drives your economic engine? That is, what is the primary thing economically that keeps you going? And then question number three is, what are you as an organization deeply passionate about? And the place in the middle is the hedgehog concept. It's the convergence of your aptitude, of your necessity in terms of economics, and your passion. It's where all those things come together. Again, once you know what that is, it helps you know what to say no to and to focus on what really matters. And it also gives this incredible gift of clarity to you, your organization, and the people you serve. And that clarity brings a ton of freedom. So how did we answer those questions at the Nashville Baptist Association? Well, I would love to tell you, and time will tell if these are the right answers or not, guys. So everything here right now is sort of an experiment. Again, we're trying to see things through fresh eyes. But in answer to the question, what can we be the best in the world at? Well, we believe that we can be the best in the world, that there would be nobody better in the world than us at intimately knowing the churches of Nashville. We can do that the best in the world. We can know what our pastors struggle with. We can know the internal vibe and needs of individual churches. We can know all of those things, and we can know them more intimately than anybody else in the world. So that's what we think we can be the best in the world at. What drives our economic engine? Well, we've already covered this, but just to say it for clarity, the thing that drives our economic engine, we believe, is church contributions as a measure of trust and value. Now, just as a side note here, even though I understand the logic of an association saying we've got to focus on external sources of revenue, we are really trying here to actually do the reverse. That we, instead of trying to focus on external sources of revenue, we are trying to double down on church contributions, because we believe that church contributions are a measure of trust and value. And we believe that that's what's going to continue to drive our economic engine. So that's the answer to that. Church contributions is a measure of trust and value. And then what are we passionate about? Well, we are deeply passionate about forming relationships inside of our network for the purpose of church growth and health. And those are the three answers. So what happens when you bring all those things together? Well, it's really beautiful when those things come together and you're able to say very, very clearly, very succinctly, and maybe even in a pithy, catchy way, what your hedgehog concept is. So if you were to ask me, what's your hedgehog concept based on those three answers, this is what it is. That we at the Nashville Baptist Association help churches help churches. That's what we do. It brings all of those things together. It's a distributed form of ministry in which we are the catalyst for relationships among churches across Middle Tennessee. So we help churches to help other churches. Now, practically, what does that look like? Let me give you a few examples of how you start to process through that grid. One of the things that we have started doing over the last several years is we have started hosting golf tournaments, and we would do several of these a year. And we had the same group of people that came to most every golf tournament that we had. We had decided in the last year, based on this concept, that we are no longer going to host golf tournaments. It's not because I hate golf, even though I don't like golf. It is because in hosting golf tournaments, we are not helping churches help churches. It's a distraction. Even though it's a good thing, it's a distraction and a use of resources that ought to be more devoted to helping churches helping churches. That was a pretty easy one for us to say no to. But there have been others that have required much more discipline. For example, I had an email from a guy on a staff team here at a church, and it was not an unkind email, but it was a very direct email. And what he said was, we have a foster care crisis in Middle Tennessee, which is true. Why? What are you doing in order to help bring awareness to foster care? Well, I am bound by our hedgehog concept. So I had to answer that question in terms of that concept. So I had to think to myself, okay, we exist to help churches help churches. Is there a way that we can actually do this that is consistent with what our overall vision is? And so the way that I answered that question was, brother, I want to thank you for your passion about foster care. I too believe that foster care and adoption are really good, God-honoring gospel expressions. What I would love to do is find the church in Middle Tennessee that is the foremost expert, that is making a dent in the foster care issue. And then I would love to facilitate an environment in which that church can help other churches understand good, God-honoring, sustainable ways to impact the issue of foster care in our region. Here's another example. Had a pastor messaged me a week or so ago and just said, hey, we're about to go on the search for a worship pastor. You have any names that you can recommend? Well, the truth is I do have some names that I could recommend. But again, you're bound by your hedgehog concept. So rather than taking the easy way of just firing off the email saying, man, let me give you 5 or 6 guys that you could consider. Better and more consistent with our vision is to process that through. How can I take the opportunity to help churches help churches? And so rather than just recommending those names, which I might still do, what I instead responded with was, brother, there's 3 other churches who have just walked through a real similar search. Could I connect you with those guys? Because they probably have some suggestions about where they posted those the job resumes that they got. They might really have some wisdom for you. In fact, they might actually have some candidates that they looked at that weren't a good fit for you, but for them, but might be a good fit for you. And when you start going down that road, it sort of spins off and makes you started thinking. And I thought, well, man, maybe there's a way that we can actually sort of, kind of systemize that process. Could we create a culture in our association where anybody has a staff search that they know that at the end of that staff search, I'm going to forward our unchosen candidates to the associational office, and they're going to keep a record of those so that when another pastor, another church is going through a search, that these are all candidates that have previously expressed interest in a church in our area. Is this a way for churches to help churches? And I think it is. But I think you see the overall principle of what it does. It becomes a fence for your ministry to let you know what gets in and what gets out, and a real evaluation tool to help you know not what are the bad opportunities, because they're not bad, but what are the right opportunities to be able to do it. I believe that the way that associations will thrive in the future is through clarity and focus. And your association likely will not look like ours, but the principles of clarity and focus and zeroing in and then being diligent and disciplined about what it is that you are going to choose to engage the limited resources you have in. Those are principles that really are transferable across associations, regardless of whether they're urban or rural or large or small. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. It's been a pleasure to be able to talk about that stuff. And of course, if anybody wants to talk more about it, you can always reach out to me. I'm glad to do it.
Hey, Michael, I think I see another book title coming, maybe mirroring Simple Association.
So maybe who knows? Who knows? But who knows what the Lord will do?
Hey, this is great stuff, and I was looking to see in the chat if there were any particular questions about any of the concepts, the hedgehog concept, or any of the other things that you mentioned today. I don't see any of those, but I do want, if you can, maybe take the last 3 to 5 minutes here, and you've shared a couple of the things that were positive in saying no, and then a couple of the things that have really been impactful in changing the perspective on what we're going to say or how we're going to say yes to. But maybe share a quick story of one of your greatest wins in seeing a church help another church.
Yeah, that's great. So I think one of the biggest wins that we're seeing right now is that there's a church in Antioch, and it's a church that's been on a fairly steady decline, as many churches are and have been. And they currently have a pastor that is bivocational, and guys, it's just going to be hard for that church to be revitalized without a full-time pastor doing the work there. But of course, that the church can't afford to pay their pastor in a full-time fashion. And so we're working on a project right now where, in sitting with this pastor, we've done some salary assessments and basically worked backward to say, okay, what are if we take a 3-year timeline with some specific goals, what are the necessary contributions you would need from the outside in order to become full-time at the end of 3 years, that being a sustainable role by the operating budget of the church. Having come to those numbers, it's been a pretty easy conversation to go to churches in our association that are interested in churches revitalizing other churches and say, we've got a pastor, we've got a roadmap for revitalization. What we need is church involvement. Would you commit to X amount of dollars in year one, X less in year two, and then X less in year three? And that has been it's honestly a surprisingly easy partnership to broker. One of the great things about that is that we're still involved at an associational level, but it really is at this point now churches helping churches. That they're deeply involved from a congregational aspect, praying for each other, but also financially supporting each other. So those are exciting things. There's been a handful of things like that have happened. And we're trying to document all of those because I do sense that even though we're early on in this process, that there's a flywheel effect that can happen when you have a couple of wins under your belt like that, and you can publicly tout them as, man, churches in our area really will help other churches.